Hello, everyone. Also, happy Black History Month. Today, I want to talk about something that I would love to bring a bit more clarity to, which is the idea or reality of a victim spirit or a victim mentality. What is it? Is it even real in the first place? Where does it come from? What does it mean? Let's talk about this. So, let me start off by saying, or just answering the question of, do I actually believe that such a thing as a victim spirit or a victim mentality can or does exist? Yes. So, since I believe that it exists, what is it? So, my answer to that is, in reality, a victim spirit is different from a victim mentality. They're two separate things. And most commonly, what you're experiencing is a mentality. Now, that mentality, well, it's the mentality of being a victim. But what does that really look like as far as a manifestation? Because oftentimes we experience a misdiagnosis, and it's a very intentional misdiagnosis where you have it's more so used to dismiss people who are actually encountering injustice. What does a real victim mentality look like? A victim mentality is whenever you find yourself or see yourself as a victim, even when nothing is happening to you. It's regardless of the scenario, you're the one being wronged, and it's a way in which to avoid accountability, meaning that everything that goes wrong in my life must be someone else's fault. That is a problem. But that is not always how a victim spirit or a victim mentality will actually manifest. On the opposite end of that spectrum, still within the same mentality, is a victim who's so broken they now fight for their abuser and they fight against those who seek to liberate them. It's being broken beyond repair or the desire to be repaired, to where you now see your oppressor as your savior. You start to develop a Stockholm syndrome. That still falls within the archetype of this victim mentality. So, yes, it does exist and it manifests in two different ways. So, where does this come from? Or why would I even need to make this video or talk about this with y'all? Remember, I said that it comes with a lot of misdiagnosis. Typically, whenever you hear someone mention a victim spirit or a victim mentality, they use them interchangeably. Usually, what you're experiencing is an attempt at suppression, right? And you'll usually have this thrown at you whenever you function as myself, as a voice for someone else's cause or a cause that they think you're personally affected by. It's a suppression tactic, because the idea, or at least the idea presented revolving around this, is the idea that, well, nothing's happening to you. You just don't want to take accountability. That's not always true. There are cases where that is true, but you have to look at reality. There's an entire world happening around our small circles. So the majority rules, right? So it's, and understand this, a lot of the people who use it, it's just their way of saying, please stop talking about that. You're making me uncomfortable. It's not coming from a place of discernment, it's coming from a place of irritation. You are disturbing me with this topic. This topic, I don't find it fun. So they'll often couple talking against the victim mentality or a victim spirit by also trying to project onto the speaker that they're wounded, they're hurt, they're argumentative, they're aggressive, they talk too much, they just like to hear themselves talk. They have some malicious intent behind it. That's typically what'll accompany it, and they'll do it under the banner of, let's just all get along. Let's move past this. Let's not talk about this. But how many of us know, just from studying history or maybe in our personal lives, that problems don't get solved if we don't talk about them? So, in fact, someone who's willing to speak out doesn't have a victim spirit. They don't. They don't have a victim mentality. That is a mentality that refuses to be a victim. Again, I gave you two angles of that spectrum earlier, where you have those who are making something out of nothing, and then you have those who are in complete denial of the something that is occurring, to the extent of supporting the ones who are persisting in the oppression. The best thing that you can do for an abuser is to refuse to tell your side of the story. They will kill you and say you loved it. The best thing you can do when you're dealing with an oppressor, with a suppressor, with an abuser, is uplift them and submit yourself to them. This is a submission tactic, because the idea isn't actually to bring about peace and harmony and love. That's a cover up. The idea behind it is, I don't want you talking about this. You're making me uncomfortable. You're disturbing my peace. You're making me uncomfortable. Someone else might be uncomfortable. And while that might be a valid criticism, when you're dealing with actual atrocities, that's the wrong stance to take when people are actually suffering. When people are actually are actually being mistreated, and you take the stance of, don't disturb my peace with that disturbing news. That is more of a manifestation of this victim spirit that y'all like to throw around, because victims react in different ways. And we actually get to see this play out, especially within the civil rights age. Sadly, we're back to the civil rights age, but just a few decades ago, not too long ago, you got to see this play out when Black people were being lynched regularly out in public, where schools and life was still segregated during the Jim Crow era. You got to see people manifest, or more so, you get to see the reactions of the people regarding these atrocities. And every one of us, in a way, is a result of the decisions that our parents and our grandparents made while being in that time period. I'm talking to us in the States, painting this picture here. And funny enough, there's a TV show, there's a cartoon that did a great job portraying these different archetypes, even within the Black community, because we all respond to trauma differently. You have those of us who will fight back. There have always been those who will fight back at the expense of their own lives, no matter what. You have those who will privately support, but will sneak on in order to just exist. You have those who are so afraid of the oppressor, they'll sell you out as long as it protects them. You have those whose reality is so warped that they see themselves as equal to the oppressor, and they'll actually come at you for thinking highly of yourself. They, to a certain level of delusion, find their own complexion, their own ancestry as a curse, as a disadvantage. I'm talking to us in America. So what we experienced, every one of our grandparents made a different decision, whether they were white, they were Black, or they were something else. They made a decision concerning based on what was happening around them, and they passed those values on to their children, and then those values got passed on to their grandkids, and we are where we are now because of that. So you might have been raised by a family, because understand, this isn't far away. I'm not talking about slavery. I'm of a personal belief that the Jim Crow era was worse than slavery, that what happened to us after we got our freedom was worse than what happened to us while we were slaves. That was when they were using Black babies as crocodile bait in Florida. That is when they created carnival games of mutilating our infants and mutilating our toddlers. That is when they started creating picnics where they would break into Black churches, round up as many people as they could, and they would send out cards to invite their family members over to watch them hang and lynch several Negroes at a time out in the park. That's where your picnics come from. people had different reactions to watching that stuff happen. So there were some people who got so afraid that they said, I can't handle this. This can't be happening. I don't want to look at it. So their means of coping, their coping strategy was to put their head in the sand, to cover their eyes, to cover their ears, to cover their mouth, and say it's not happening. It's a detachment from reality that gave them some level of security, and that's sad, right? Because that meant reality was so bad you had to block it all out. So there's Black people that you will encounter that even though these horrible things were happening to us, to them, it's better for them to think it didn't. That's not proof that it didn't. It's proof that it happened because it got so bad that people's coping strategy was to cover their eyes. If I can't see it, it's not happening. Well, there's another manifestation of this that you'll come across, right? There's people, as a byproduct of covering their eyes, they stir up a certain deal of aggression, right? When someone who might be a freedom fighter, that might be an activist, who's still fighting the good fight, who's still trying to get this equality, who's still trying to fight for equity, there's a certain level of aggression that comes up. And it's not so much that they're angry at the person for speaking out, they're terrified that that person's actions are going to bring repercussions to them when they're trying to pretend that nothing is wrong. So it's a manifestation of fear that manifests itself in an appearance of anger. It's like playing hide and seek and somebody loud comes and hides next to you and you like, get away from me, you're going to get us both caught. That's kind of the psychological reaction that you're getting from people within our community. I'm helping you understand our community a bit better. For those of us in it and those of us watching from the outside, this is a complex topic. So I'm trying my best here. So understand the minority within a minority within a minority of Black people that you'll find that support white supremacy are proof of the brokenness. You don't find that in any other culture unless you find an atrocity before it. This is where you find people in history that they don't tell you about, like William Ellison. William Ellison was a Black slave owner. He got free and started his own plantation. Wow, that's wild. You mean to tell me that there was even a time where Black people owned Black people in the States? Absolutely. Because one of the ways to make it in America, and we all know this if you're a person of color, you're only as successful as you are white. So the less of your culture, the less of your ways, the less of your ideologies that come from your people that you maintain, the more successful you get to be. The standard of American success is within the favorite demographic of heterosexual white men, typically a Christian if we're throwing in religion. So the farther away you get from that, the less success you're able to have. So this is what we start to experience, right? That in a pursuit of security, you'll find Black people who are willing to throw their culture under the bus just to make a living. That is a manifestation of a victim spirit. That's a level of brokenness that few people ever recover from. It's a message in the back of their head that says, what I am must be the problem. My skin color must be the problem. My ancestry must be the problem. My lineage must be the problem. So I'm going to renounce it. I'm going to denounce it. I'm just going to be a person. It's not about Black. No. And now here's the thing, right? This isn't just regular old people, just random people that you find out and about. No, that is true, but you'll often find this amongst leaders, right? These are your Black leaders that won't speak up unless they're addressing the Black community in a negative way. We need to get our stuff together is the only time they address issues within our community. Yet when we still get lynched, they have nothing to say. That's a manifestation of a victim. They're terrified. They still have a partnership with massa that they're afraid of breaking. So yes, sometimes that's your preachers, sometimes that's your teachers. Those are leaders a lot of the time, and they pass that ideology on to their trusted followers wherever they got their following from. And it's convoluted, it's upsetting, it's disturbing, but understand this, reality is very disturbing. And part of the solution, right, is to be able to look at how disturbing reality is long enough, not for us to find someone to blame, not that, but long enough for us to find a solution. Now, that might begin with blaming. Because in order to solve a problem, you have to get to the root of a problem. Why are we in this predicament? For those of you watching who aren't familiar with the United States, let me tell you something that you might not know. Like most countries, we have classism as a structure in which our government functions, in which our society functions, meaning that you're separated by class. You have the high class, the middle class, and the low class based on your economic status. In addition to this, and this is what makes us a little bit unique, is that we also have racism built into the foundations of our nation, which means that not only do we deal with classism on a social level, on a socioeconomic level, we also deal with racism on that same level, and they're married to each other. Many of the things that we do today that are natural to us were created simply to keep Black people as low class. And it just so happened to impact the other demographics that also found themselves as poor. So there's a few manifestations of this still, right? Because again, the idea behind this victim mentality is no, you have to take control of yourself. Whatever's happening to you must be your doing. Only what you allow to happen. Everything that happens to you must be your fault. It can never be the fault of another, is kind of the idea. So if you find yourself blaming someone else for something that happened to you, you must be the one in a delusion. And again, that's not always true. Very much that can be an issue where someone is avoiding accountability for the things that they are doing wrong. That is actually a problem within the Black community. Is that our major problem? Absolutely not. We have a system built against us within this nation specifically. That's built specifically for the people who are descendants of slaves, which is why foreigners will come here and not suffer the way we have. When you talk about justice, right, you first acknowledge that there was a wrong done, and then you right that wrong. The Kemites had a principle known as Ma'at. One of the principles within Ma'at is reciprocity, meaning that insofar as you've damaged, you need to help fix. This is where we talk about reparations and restitution. This is a natural byproduct of justice and law, meaning that whenever something is done to another, there is some level of restitution that's followed in order to right that wrong and help them recover from the injustice that's been done against them. This is not something that's ever happened to Black people in America. So why don't we just stop talking about it? Why don't we just partner together, make our own thing, and kind of just do away with expecting white people to help us? Why don't we do that? Well, we've done that multiple times in the past, and every time that we have, the government and or white people got together and destroyed it. There's still survivors from the Tulsa massacre today. Back when we had a Black Wall Street, they burned it to the ground. They blew it up because it was thriving. You have Lake Lanier, which is a city that they flooded because it was thriving. So we've tried this put the past behind us and let's move on thing many times, several times, over and over and over again. There have been hundreds of Black massacres. Actually, just as recent as, I want to say, either a year or 2 years ago, there was a boxer, Tank Davis. I want to say he bought his neighborhood. He bought a neighborhood in Philadelphia, I want to say it was. And I want to say it was the very next day they burned it to the ground. They set it on fire. So again, we're not talking about something hundreds of years ago. We are talking about something that has been happening for hundreds of years. In fact, for my Christian audience who watches my stuff, man of God, who I still respect, David Hogan, actually talked about this when he came down to Southeast Texas back in 2020 in wake of the riots, right? This was after the riots had sort of died down. And I respect his boldness, right? Because this move alone, more boldness than any of the other preachers I know. David Hogan stood in Vidor, Texas, and if you know Texas and you know Vidor, you know what you know the severity behind what I'm saying. He stood in Vidor, Texas, in a room full of white Christians, and actually reprimanded them for gaslighting the black community. He said, "You have 400 years of pent up aggression, and we want to pretend that nothing's happened." He said, "If half of that would have happened to me, I'd be angrier than them." He said, "We won't get anywhere by trying to convince them that they don't have a reason to be angry. We need to help them people." David Hogan is more bold than any preacher I know. Because far too often, in my attempts to partner with other leaders, I've been ridiculed, mistreated, outcasted, simply for speaking out against the issue without saying any names. All because people find themselves in the problem side when I'm telling you what problems are for a community. So, this is how you begin to bridge the gap. When you're having a conversation with another person and you're talking about reality, the way that each of you are experiencing the world that you're both in, you have to be mature enough to understand that the world might be perfect for you, but could be hell for the person you're talking to. And their reality is not invalid just because yours is perfect. That something that brings me joy might come at the expense of someone else. And I don't have the right to tell them to get over it just because I like my peace and my solidarity. That's not right. And that's not God. See, when we're talking about peace, right? Hebrew word for peace is shalom. Shalom doesn't just mean everybody chill out. No, shalom, when you break it down into Hebrew, it means to destroy the authority or to remove the authority that's causing chaos. It recognizes the root of the problem and it aims for that. So true peace isn't the idea of sitting quietly while a few people suffer, but at least we're all quiet. No, that's just being quiet. When we're talking about peace and we're talking about harmony, we're looking at a society where there are no oppressors. And by default, since there are no oppressors, there are no abusers, there are no victims. And again, the reason I brought up what happened to the black community is because in a natural progress of righting the wrongs, moving forward, and actually fighting for peace, justice, and harmony, we would have received reparations by now. That's how you move on. So you can never demand forgiveness. You can never demand forgetting, moving on before justice has been served. That's improper, that's incorrect, and that's an error. You're supposed to right the wrong first. And then the process of forgiving and the process of healing can move on. The church has spent too much time telling people to turn a blind eye, turn the other cheek, do nothing, let God handle it. And I'm looking around. God ain't handled it. Not really, no. We still get lynched. That's a problem. That's a problem that needs to be solved. In the big year of 2025, you know, there's still sundown towns where we know that if you're of a certain ethnicity and you look a certain way, you shouldn't be there after dark. I think we should be done with those by now, but no, it won't get solved as long as it's treated as a black issue that black people just need to get over. It'll get solved when white people refuse to allow that to persist in their families because we're not lynching ourselves. It has to go beyond the I'm not racist and move into, okay, I might have been enabling some behavior that was at your detriment. This is what a mature conversation kind of looks like. Okay, I might have played a part in your downfall. I might have. Yes, this thing that I benefit from actually did come at your expense. Okay, I understand that. Well, let's see about making this fair. Because oftentimes when you criticize the United States for being a racist system, specifically against us, you have people who pretend to care about the veterans, who pretend to care about the troops that'll say too many people have fought and died for this country for you to call it racist. And it has nothing to do with it. Reason why I say it has nothing to do with it is because that racism manifested itself even in our US government, in our troops, and in our military. What do I mean by that? Well, look no further than the fact that the VA has already said that they were refusing to give veterans their benefits. You know, that GI Bill that we're supposed to get for putting our lives on the line? The VA has already said that there's been foul play over the last 50, 60 years, which has prevented Black veterans from even being able to benefit. Well, what does that mean? That means that the benefits that they would have gotten, that white veterans have already received, that they used to build themselves up and by default build their families up, they didn't get. That means that individual and that family didn't get to benefit from being in the military. So no, simply, oh no, you're disrespecting the troops. No, the troops were disrespected when y'all allowed that level of injustice to persist. You'll never solve a problem by silencing the whistleblowers. You have to attack this stuff at the root, and we have to do it together. Racism. Now, honestly, I'll tell y'all this. Y'all feel how y'all want about it. I believe if my community, if Black people wanted revenge instead of equality, we'd already have equality. Take it as you will. We'd already have equality if we wanted revenge. If you want to do a little research, there's a woman of God named Dr. Jane Elliott. Love her. I've had her on my show before. And one of the things that she's been doing, she actually started her ministry when Dr. Martin Luther King got shot. She got fed up. Now, she's a white lady. She's, I want to say she's 91 now. She's still active, still in ministry. And so she created the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes exercise, which was a way to put white people in an environment in which they could experience the same level of racism that we typically deal with on a regular basis. See, privilege isn't always more so that you get extra things that you can do that other people can't. Oftentimes it manifests in the level of ease that you can do a thing, meaning that there aren't as many barriers set up against you for something that you can't control. So she would put them in this experiment. You could find the videos. I love the one that she did on Oprah, but pretty much by the end of the exercise, she gets to the end and she's doing Q&As, and she gets white people to open up about why they pretend not to see what's going on around them or what they're afraid of when dealing with the Black community. And one of the things that often comes up is we're afraid that they're going to do to us what we've been doing to them. And then she turns to the Black people and she's like, hey, do y'all want revenge or y'all just want equality? And 10 times out of 10, the Black people say, no, we just want to be treated equal. We just want equality. That's it. You're dealing with fear of something that another party doesn't want. Now, one of the other angles of it is that, well, when you're that used to privilege, equality looks like an attack. It looks like a threat. All for that same reason. If they become the majority and we become the minority, we might be treated the way that we've been treating minorities. So it's the fear of karma. It's the fear of reaping and sowing. You know how you avoid reaping and sowing? Reciprocity. You have to right the wrongs. I know I've said a lot, but yes, when you're talking about a victim spirit and a victim mentality, understand that there is a difference between being delusional. And by delusional, that's either seeing yourself as a victim when you are not one, or being so much in the delusion that you can't see reality for what it is. Because being a victim alone is not a mentality or a spirit, it's a state of a situation, meaning that you are or you aren't, regardless of how you frame it in your mind. There's people who suffer from abuse and they don't process that abuse for years. They didn't realize that they were victims. You know how many little boys lose their virginity when they're 12, 13, 14, 15 to women who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. They didn't realize that they were victims, but they were. Even if it's presented as a win, that's a victim. That victim mentality manifests itself in many different ways. But understand this, speaking out and speaking against injustice when it is happening, that's not a victim. That's something that's refusing to be a victim. That's something that's trying to end victimhood, because you end victimhood not with the victims, but with the oppressors, but with the abusers. Abuse ends with abusers. When you make a world unsafe for abusers, you don't have victims. When your house, when your ear is a safe place for victims to express themselves and let go and heal, that's when we start to see the end of victimhood. You don't see it in the midst of abusers getting away without ever being held accountable. Because this is something I've heard preached from pulpits. You can't focus on, you got to get the board out of your eye. You can't focus on the speck in theirs, and the speck in theirs is serial molestation. That's a bit much. I think we need to focus on that. Understand that, and I've said this before, when I teach on some of these more controversial things, my goal isn't to make you feel guilty. I don't really care about your feelings. It's about education and reformation. Things need to change, and either you're going to help us change them, or you're going to find yourself offended whenever I speak against an injustice I didn't tag you in. So this is my message to those of you who have actually been victims. Tell your story. Tell on them. Speak up. Otherwise, they'll say you enjoyed it. Otherwise, there will be no accountability. There will be no justice. There will be no reformation. And you leave in the past. You leave in your past someone else's future. Meaning that what you might not even be healed from, you leave an open door for someone else to begin a journey of dysfunction. We have to mature enough to be able to have mature conversations. So I'll tell you this, if you find yourself in the conversation regarding injustice and you're feeling uncomfortable, that's a good thing. If you're tired of hearing me or others talk about racism, imagine how tired we are of experiencing it. We still have lynchings in the United States. We still have regular injustice in the United States. We're specifically losing rights in the United States. Now, I'll tell you this, one of the most sinister things you can do is find the smallest demographic that agrees with you and use that to gaslight the majority. And I'll tell you this, I'll leave you with a statistic. Over 90% of Black people did not vote for Trump. Take that as you would. Take that as you would. So that's all I have for y'all today. Might talk about this again, you know. Uh I have something planned for Black History Month. Stay tuned. If y'all want to connect with me, caveofmystery.org. That's it. Love y'all. Talk to y'all later.